In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where 1,000 species bow before the dreaded Krillex assassins, beings whose very presence turns seasoned warriors into trembling prey, there exists a peculiar anomaly. A single species that greets death not with fear, but with something far more terrifying to those who deal in terror: laughter. They call it Terra, the Deathworld, a planet so hostile that its very existence defies galactic understanding, where storms can shatter mountains, where the smallest creatures carry enough venom to kill a Gorvok battle beast, and where the dominant species, humans, have somehow not just survived, but thrived in ways that make even the most hardened galactic veterans question reality itself. When Zethkar the Soul Reaper, the most feared assassin in 7 sectors, receives a contract to eliminate a single human traitor on the remote station Kepler 7, he expects another routine hunt. After all, what could one soft-skinned biped from a backwater world possibly do against a being who has ended the lives of over 3,000 targets across the galaxy? He's about to discover that on a death world, even the traitors carry the scars of 1,000 battles fought just to see another sunrise. And when death comes calling on a human, sometimes death itself needs to learn a new kind of fear. The contract seemed simple. The target seemed harmless. The hunter thought he knew what death looked like. He was wrong about everything. Zethkar the Soul Reaper stood 8 feet tall in the shadows of Kepler 7's lower docking bay, his 4 arms moving with practiced precision as he checked his arsenal. Each weapon had tasted blood across a dozen worlds. Each blade had carved through bone and sinew of species both mighty and meek. The chitinous plates of his exoskeleton gleamed dull black in the station's artificial twilight, absorbing light like a void made flesh. His compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, tracked every movement in the bustling commercial sector 3 levels above through the bioneural implants wired directly into the station's security network. The contract had come through the usual channels: anonymous client, substantial payment, single target. What made this assignment unusual was not the target's supposed crimes or political importance, but rather their complete and utter insignificance. Marcus Chun, human trader, age 37 standard years, operating a small freight business between the Outer Rim settlements and the core worlds. No military background listed, no criminal record, no apparent reason why anyone would pay 50,000 galactic credits to see him dead. Zethkar's mandibles clicked together in what passed for contemplation among his species. In his 2 centuries of professional killing, he had learned to trust his instincts above all else. Something about this contract felt wrong, though he couldn't quite identify what. Perhaps it was the client's insistence on making it look like an accident. Perhaps it was the unusually detailed dossier that somehow contained remarkably little actual information about the target. Or perhaps it was the way every other assassin in the guild had suddenly found pressing business elsewhere when this particular job was posted. But 50,000 credits was 50,000 credits, and Zethkar had not built his reputation by walking away from paying customers. Besides, what possible threat could a single human pose? He had killed humans before. Soft, weak creatures who broke easily and died quietly. Their only advantage was their unpredictability, but even that was manageable with proper preparation. Through his networked vision, he watched Marcus Chun emerge from the customs checkpoint on level 3. The human looked exactly as described in the dossier. Average height for his species, brown hair kept short and practical, wearing the standard utility jumpsuit of an independent trader. Nothing about him suggested danger. Nothing about him suggested he was anything more than another small-time merchant trying to scratch out a living on the galaxy's edges. Zethkar began moving through the station's maintenance corridors, following a route he had memorized during the 3 days he had spent studying this target. The human ship, a modified Corellian light freighter called the Lucky Strike, was docked in Bay 94. According to the station's records, Chen had filed a departure request for the following morning, bound for the agricultural world of Demeter Prime with a cargo of rare earth minerals. The plan was elegantly simple. A small explosive charge attached to the ship's reactor would create a cascade failure approximately 6 hours into the journey, making it appear as though faulty maintenance had caused a tragic accident. The human would die alone in the cold vacuum of space, another victim of the dangerous life of an independent trader. Clean, simple, and completely untraceable. As Zethkar reached the access tunnel that led to Bay 94, he paused to activate his personal cloaking field. The technology was expensive and highly illegal in most sectors, but it was one of the many tools that separated professional killers from common criminals. Light bent around his massive frame, rendering him effectively invisible to most forms of detection. He slipped through the airlock and into the cargo bay of the Lucky Strike with the fluid grace that had made him legendary among his peers. The ship was larger than he had expected, clearly modified extensively from its original configuration. What caught his attention immediately was not the size, but the scars. The hull plating bore the distinctive melted grooves of plasma weapon impacts. The reinforced bulkheads showed stress fractures that spoke of violent decompression events. This was not the ship of a peaceful merchant. More concerning were the subtle defensive modifications he began to notice as he moved deeper into the vessel. Redundant life support systems, military-grade radiation shielding, and what appeared to be concealed weapon mounts that had been carefully disguised to pass casual inspection. Either Marcus Chun was paranoid to an extraordinary degree, or he had survived encounters that would have killed most beings in the galaxy. Zethkar's confidence, which had never wavered through 2 centuries of successful hunts, began to develop hairline cracks. He had made his reputation by being thorough, by never underestimating his prey, but the intelligence he had been provided was clearly incomplete. No ordinary trader needed this level of defensive preparation. No ordinary trader survived the kind of damage this ship had clearly endured. He found Marcus Chun in the ship's small galley, sitting at a metal table with a steaming mug in his hands. The human appeared to be reading something on a portable datapad, completely unaware that death itself was standing less than 10 feet away. Or so it seemed. You know, Marcus said without looking up from his reading, most people knock before entering someone else's ship. Zitkar froze. His cloaking field was active. The ship's sensors showed no signs of detecting his presence. Yet somehow, this unremarkable human trader had not only known he was there, but seemed completely unconcerned about it. I have to admit, Marcus continued, taking a sip from his mug, I was expecting someone a bit more impressive. The great Zethkar, the Soul Reaper, terror of 7 sectors, and you sneak onto my ship like some common thief. He finally looked up, and Zethkar found himself staring into brown eyes that held no trace of fear. Your reputation really has been exaggerated, hasn't it? The assassin's 4 hands moved to his weapons with deadly precision, but Marcus simply raised one hand in a casual gesture. Before you start the whole dramatic killer routine, the human said, maybe we should talk about who really sent you here, because I'm pretty sure you don't know what you've walked into. Zethkar's vocal cords, modified to produce the subsonic frequencies that could paralyze most species with fear, rumbled to life. You will die, human. Whether it is quick and clean or slow and painful depends entirely on how cooperative you choose to be. Marcus Chin laughed. Not the nervous, high-pitched sound of someone trying to hide their terror, but a genuine, amused chuckle that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. Oh, that's good, Marcus said, setting down his mug and leaning back in his chair. You know, I haven't heard a decent death threat in almost a month. I was starting to think I was losing my touch. The laugh was what did it. In his 2 centuries of killing, Zethkar had heard every possible response to the promise of death. He had heard screams and pleas and offers of bribes. He had heard defiant last words and desperate bargaining. But never, in all his years of professional murder, had he heard someone laugh at him. Not laugh in hysteria or madness, but laugh as if the very concept of being threatened by him was somehow genuinely amusing. You dare mock me? Zethkar's voice dropped to the subsonic frequencies that had turned the bowels of hardened criminals to water. Marcus tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something interesting but distant. You know, that's a neat trick with the voice thing. Very intimidating. I bet it works great on most species. He stood up, moving with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in their environment. The problem is, you're not dealing with most species. You're dealing with a human. And we're from a death world. Zethkar had heard the term before, of course. Earth was classified as a class, 12 death world in the galactic databases, but he had always assumed that was simply bureaucratic exaggeration. Every world had its dangers. Every species had its challenges. Let me explain something to you, Marcus said, walking over to a wall panel and casually entering a command sequence. Where I come from, we have storms that can level cities. We have predators that hunt in packs and can take down prey 10 times their size. We have microscopic organisms that can kill you in dozens of creative ways. We have plants that are more toxic than most military-grade chemical weapons. The ship's lights dimmed, and emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow that made Zethkar's black carapace seem to absorb even more light than before. But the really interesting thing about humans, Marcus continued, is that we didn't just survive on that world. We conquered it. We became the apex predators on a planet where everything else was trying to kill us. And then, when we ran out of things to fight on our own world, we decided to see what the rest of the galaxy had to offer. Zethkar drew 2 of his ceremonial killing blades, their molecular sharp edges gleaming in the red light. He had heard enough philosophy for one evening. Your words will not save you, human. Save me. Marcus turned around, and for the first time, Zethkar saw something in the human's expression that gave him pause. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was anticipation. Who said anything about saving me? The human reached into a wall compartment and withdrew what appeared to be a standard emergency kit. But as he opened it, Zethkar realized it contained nothing that belonged in any emergency kit he had ever seen. Instead, it held items that were clearly weapons, though of no design he recognized. See, here's the thing about being a traitor from a death world, Marcus said, selecting what looked like a small metal cylinder from a kit. You don't just carry cargo from one place to another. You carry cargo through pirate-infested space, past planets where the local fauna consider spaceships to be particularly large prey animals, through asteroid fields where the asteroids sometimes turn out to be sleeping void whales, and past space stations where beings like you are considered the friendly locals. Zethkar moved forward, his legendary speed carrying him across the small galley in less than a second. His blades traced perfect arcs through the air, designed to separate the human's head from his shoulders in one clean motion. The blades met empty air. Marcus had moved with a speed that defied everything Zethkar knew about human physiology. Not only had the traitor evaded the attack, but he had somehow managed to position himself behind the 8-foot-tall assassin. Reflexes, Marcus said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. When you grow up on a world where hesitation means death, you tend to develop pretty good reflexes. Zethkar spun around, all 4 arms moving in a complex pattern designed to create a web of razor-sharp death that no living being could possibly evade. Again, his blades found only empty space. The human had moved again, this time to a position that should have been physically impossible to reach in the time available. You know what's really funny? Marcus asked, and Zethkar realized the human was now standing calmly beside the galley's main entrance. I've been trying to figure out who sent you. The problem is, I've made so many enemies over the years that it could be anyone. The Carthan Syndicate is still upset about that business on Rigel 7. The Vorthan Empire probably hasn't forgiven me for that incident with their trade fleet. Oh, and there's the hegemony, of course. They're always sending assassins after humans. Zethkar abandoned finesse and lunged forward with pure predatory fury. His species had evolved from pack hunters who could bring down prey 3 times their size through sheer savage aggression. His claws extended, his mandibles spread wide, and his killing instincts took complete control. Marcus didn't try to evade this time. Instead, he stepped forward to meet the charge, the small cylinder in his hand extending into something that looked like a cross between a sword and a lightning rod. The collision should have ended with Zethkar's claws buried in the human's chest, and his mandibles crushing the fragile biped's skull. Instead, the assassin found himself on his back on the galley floor, staring up at the ceiling, with pain shooting through his exoskeleton from at least 3 different points of impact. Plasma sword, Marcus explained, holding up the weapon that was now crackling with barely contained energy. Human design, of course. We're really good at making things that kill other things efficiently. Zethkar rolled to his feet with the fluid motion of a natural predator, but for the first time in his career, doubt crept into his thoughts. This human was not behaving like any prey he had ever encountered. The traitor was not just defending himself. He was actively enjoying the encounter. "Let me guess," Marcus said, beginning to circle the much larger alien with the easy confidence of an experienced fighter. "Whoever hired you told you this would be easy. Just some soft human traitor who wouldn't see you coming. They probably paid you up front, which should have been your first clue that something wasn't right." The assassin said nothing, but his compound eyes tracked the human's movement with increasing urgency. Every instinct he possessed was now screaming that he was in mortal danger, but that was impossible. He was Zethkar the Soul Reaper. He had killed beings that could shatter mountains with their bare hands. One human traitor could not possibly represent a genuine threat. "The thing is," Marcus continued, "humans have a saying. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And a 50,000 credit contract to kill an unknown traitor? That definitely seems too good to be true." Marcus moved again, faster than before, and Zethkar felt something slice through the joint between 2 of his exoskeleton plates. Not deep enough to cause serious damage, but precise enough to demonstrate that the human could have inflicted a killing blow if he had chosen to. "You're playing with me," Zethkar realized, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been confusion in a less experienced killer. "Well, yes," Marcus admitted cheerfully, "but only because I'm still trying to figure out who sent you. See, most of my enemies know better than to send just one assassin. They usually send teams, or fleets, sometimes both." The human paused in his circling, and his expression became thoughtful. "Although," he said slowly, "there's one possibility I hadn't considered. Tell me, did your client specifically request that my death look like an accident?" Zethkar's silence was answer enough. Marcus Chun began to laugh again, but this time there was something different in the sound. Something that made even a being who had dedicated his entire existence to dealing death feel a cold chill run through his exoskeleton. "Oh, that's perfect," Marcus said. "They're not trying to kill me. They're trying to kill you." The words hit Zethkar with more force than any physical blow could have managed. In his 2 centuries of professional killing, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to read situations, to understand the hidden currents of motive and opportunity that drove his clients to seek his services. But this possibility had never occurred to him. "Think about it," Marcus continued, lowering his plasma sword but keeping it activated. The weapon's energy field cast dancing shadows across the galley walls. "You're the most feared assassin in 7 sectors. Your reputation alone is worth more than most people see in a lifetime. But reputations can become inconvenient, especially if someone wants to operate in your territory without competition." Zethkar's mind raced through the implications. The anonymous client. The insistence on making the death look accidental. The unusually detailed dossier that somehow missed every relevant piece of information about the target. The way every other guild assassin had found pressing business elsewhere when this contract was posted. "Who are you?" he asked, his subsonic voice carrying none of its usual menace. Marcus Chun set his plasma sword down on the galley table and picked up his mug again, taking a thoughtful sip of whatever was inside it. "That's a more complicated question than you might think," he said. "According to my official documentation, I'm exactly what I appear to be. Marcus Chun, independent trader, Born on Earth, licensed to operate in 17 different sectors. Clean record, reliable reputation, boring as asteroid dust. He paused, studying Zeth Kar's expression with the kind of analytical attention that the assassin usually reserved for his own prey. But unofficially, Marcus continued, I'm someone who has spent the last 15 years moving through the galaxy's darker corners, carrying cargo that doesn't officially exist to places that aren't on any star charts, for clients who pay very well for discretion and the ability to handle unexpected complications. Zethkar's compound eyes focused more intently on the human. This was beginning to make sense in ways that he found deeply unsettling. You are a smuggler. Among other things, Marcus admitted, though I prefer to think of myself as a freelance problem solver. The galaxy is full of problems, and humans have a particular talent for solving them in ways that other species don't expect. The assassin remained silent, but his posture had shifted subtly. He was no longer preparing to attack. Instead, he was listening with the focused attention of someone who realized they might be in over their head. Let me tell you about my last job, Marcus said, settling back into his chair as if he were discussing the weather rather than potentially deadly professional matters. 3 months ago, I was hired to transport a diplomatic courier through the Kether Nebula. Simple run, good pay, no questions asked. What the client didn't mention was that half the hegemony's battle fleet was waiting to intercept that courier. Marcus took another sip from his mug and continued. Now, most people would consider that an impossible situation. A single light freighter against a battle fleet? No contest. But the thing about humans is that we don't really understand the concept of impossible. We just understand the concept of expensive. Zethkar found himself genuinely curious about the outcome, which was not an emotion he was accustomed to experiencing during his professional work. What did you do? Well, Marcus said, the first thing I did was realize that the hegemony wasn't really interested in my courier. They were interested in sending a message to the faction that hired me. The courier was just convenient bait. The human stood up and walked over to one of the galley's wall panels, which slid aside to reveal a sophisticated communications array that was definitely not standard equipment for a civilian trader. So I sent them a message of my own, Marcus continued. I offered to sell them the courier's location in exchange for safe passage. Zethkar's mandibles clicked together in what passed for surprise among his species. You betrayed your client? Oh no, Marcus said with a grin that showed altogether too many teeth. I told him exactly where the courier would be. The problem was that I didn't mention the 50-kiloton nuclear warhead I had hidden in the cargo container that was supposed to contain the courier. The assassin stared at the human with something approaching respect. The plan was audacious, creative, and completely insane by the standards of most civilized species. The hegemony battle fleet intercepted the container exactly where I said they would, Marcus continued. They brought it aboard their flagship for a detailed examination. And then they discovered that humans have a very particular sense of humor when it comes to dealing with people who threaten our clients. You destroyed an entire battle fleet. Well, most of it, Marcus admitted. The explosion was big enough to take out the flagship and 6 escort vessels. The rest of the fleet was far enough away to survive, but they were suddenly a lot less interested in pursuing one little human freighter. Zethkar was beginning to understand why someone might want Marcus Chin dead, but he was also beginning to understand why sending a single assassin to accomplish that goal might not be the wisest approach. And the courier? Safe and sound, Marcus said proudly. Delivered exactly on schedule. The client was so impressed that they recommended me to 3 other organizations that needed someone capable of handling complicated situations. The human walked over to another wall panel and activated what appeared to be the ship's internal security system. Suddenly, Zethkar could see multiple views of Kepler-7's docking bay displayed on various screens throughout the galley. Speaking of complicated situations, Marcus said, "You might want to take a look at this." The screen showed approximately 24 figures moving through the shadows of the docking bay with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested military training. They were all armed, all wearing personal cloaking devices, and all converging on a lucky strike. Corvith death squads. Marcus observed casually. Very professional. Very thorough. Very expensive. Someone really wants to make sure this job gets done right. Zethkar stared at the screens with growing realization. The human had been correct. This was never about killing a traitor. This was about eliminating the most feared assassin in 7 sectors, along with any inconvenient witnesses. "How did you know?" he asked. Marcus tapped the side of his head, and Zethkar noticed for the first time the subtle scarring that suggested extensive cybernetic modification. "Enhanced awareness systems," Marcus explained. "Military grade. I know when someone is watching my ship, when someone is moving through the station with hostile intent, and when someone is planning something that might interfere with my schedule." The human picked up his plasma sword again and activated a second weapon that had been concealed under his jacket. This one appeared to be some kind of projectile weapon, though of a design that Zethkar didn't recognize. "The question now," Marcus said, "is whether you want to continue with your original plan and try to kill me, or whether you want to work together to deal with the people who are planning to kill both of us." Zethkar considered his options. His professional reputation was built on completing every contract he accepted, but that reputation would be worth nothing if he was dead. And the Corvith death squads had a well-deserved reputation for leaving no witnesses. "What do you propose?" he asked. Marcus Chun smiled, and for the first time, Zethkar understood why beings throughout the galaxy had learned to fear humans. It was not just their physical capabilities or their technological advantages. It was the way they approached problems that other species considered unsolvable. "Well," Marcus said, "you're supposed to be the most dangerous killer in 7 sectors. And I'm supposed to be a harmless traitor who won't see you coming. I think it's time we gave our audience exactly what they're expecting to see." The human touched a control on his communication array, and suddenly, the ship's external lights began flashing in a universal distress pattern. "Emergency beacon," Marcus explained. "Any second now, the station's security forces will start responding to investigate the distress call. The Corvith team will have to move fast if they want to complete their mission before the authorities arrive." Sure enough, the screens showed the Death Squad abandoning stealth in favor of speed. They were converging on the Lucky Strike from multiple directions, moving with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of extensive training and considerable experience. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued, his tone becoming businesslike in a way that reminded Zethkar of his most professional clients. "You're going to chase me out of this ship, making lots of noise and looking very threatening. I'm going to run toward the station's main corridor, acting terrified and calling for help. The Corvith team will assume that everything is going according to plan and will move to surround both of us. And then?" Marcus activated several more weapon systems that had been concealed throughout the galley, and Zethkar realized that the Lucky Strike was not just a modified freighter. It was a warship disguised as a civilian vessel. And then Marcus said, "We're going to teach them why humans don't like it when people try to kill us." The ship's hull shuddered slightly as the first Corvith operatives reached the airlock. Through the security screens, Zethkar could see them working to override the access controls with the kind of efficiency that spoke of considerable practice. "One more thing," Marcus added, handing the assassin a small device that looked like a standard communicator. "This will keep us in contact once we're outside. The frequency is encrypted, and it's keyed to your biometric signature. Don't lose it." Zethkar accepted the device with one of his secondary hands, still not entirely convinced that trusting a human was the wisest course of action. But the alternative was facing 24 Corvith Death Squad members alone, and even his legendary skills had limits. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Marcus paused in his preparation and looked directly at the 8-foot-tall assassin with those disturbingly calm brown eyes. "Because," he said, "on a death world, the biggest predators don't fight each other unless they absolutely have to. They save their energy for dealing with the real threats." The ship's airlock alarm began sounding, indicating that the Corvith team had successfully breached the outer seal. In approximately 30 seconds, they would be inside the Lucky Strike. "Showtime," Marcus said, raising his voice so that it would carry to the ship's audio pickups. "Please don't kill me. I'm just a trader. I don't know anything." Zethkar allowed his professional instincts to take over, moving toward the human with a fluid grace that had made him legendary. To anyone watching, it would appear that the most feared assassin in 7 sectors was doing exactly what he had been hired to do. But as they moved toward the ship's main corridor, both predators were thinking the same thing. The beings who had orchestrated this setup were about to discover what happened when you try to hunt humans on their own terms. And that was a lesson that very few beings survived long enough to share with others. The corridor outside the Lucky Strike erupted into controlled chaos as Marcus Chun burst through the airlock with Zethkar in apparent pursuit. To anyone watching, it appeared exactly as it should. A terrified human traitor fleeing from the galaxy's most feared assassin. Marcus stumbled convincingly, called for help in a voice pitched perfectly to convey desperate panic, and ran toward the main station thoroughfare, where security forces would presumably provide salvation. What the observing Corvith operatives could not see was the small tactical display built into Marcus's left contact lens, or the constant stream of information flowing through his enhanced awareness systems. 24 hostiles positioned in a perfect encirclement pattern. Military-grade weapons, personal shields, coordinated movement protocols. Professional killers who had clearly studied both their targets extensively. They were about to discover that studying someone and understanding them were two very different things. Station security. "This is Marcus Chun aboard the Lucky Strike." Marcus shouted into his communicator, his voice carrying the perfect note of someone whose world had just collapsed around them. "There's a Krillex assassin on my ship. Please help." Through the tactical net that connected them, Zethkar's voice came through with crystal clarity. "Interesting choice of words. Station security will assume you mean me." "Exactly," Marcus replied through the same channel. "Watch the Corvith positions. They're moving to intercept us before security arrives, but they're trying to maintain plausible deniability. They want this to look like you killed me and escaped, not like they staged an elaborate setup." The assassin's compound eyes tracked movement in the shadows with predatory precision. "They're surrounding us. In approximately 15 seconds, we will be completely cut off from any escape route." "Perfect," Marcus said, and there was something in his tone that made Zethkar remember why he had initially found the human unsettling. "That means they're all in position." Marcus suddenly dove behind a maintenance console, his apparent panic transforming into fluid combat motion. At the same moment, Zethkar leaped toward the corridor ceiling, his powerful legs carrying him to a position where his natural advantages would be maximized. The Corvith operatives, expecting to face a terrified traitor and an assassin focused on his original target, instead found themselves confronting two predators who had suddenly become allies. Marcus's first shot took out the Corvith team leader before the alien could even register that the situation had changed. The weapon in the human's hands was unlike anything Zethkar had seen before. It fired what appeared to be small spheres that contained plasma that exploded on impact with devastating effect. The team leader's personal shield absorbed the first sphere, but the second and third punched through and removed most of his torso from existence. From his position on the ceiling, Zethkar dropped onto the nearest operative with the kind of savage grace that had made his species legendary hunters. His claws found the gaps in the alien's armor with surgical precision, and his mandibles crushed through the helmet's protective shell before the Corvith warrior could even attempt to defend himself. "Well," Marcus said, rolling to a new position as plasma bolts began filling the air around him. "Now they know we're working together. Time for Phase 2. "What is Phase 2? Zethkar asked, using his superior mobility to stay ahead of the weapon's fire being directed at him. "We stopped playing defense," Marcus replied. The human produced a device that looked like a standard emergency flare and threw it toward the center of the Corvith formation. Instead of producing light, however, it generated an electromagnetic pulse that overloaded half of their personal shields and disabled their coordination systems. Human military technology, Marcus explained as he began moving toward the now vulnerable operatives. We've had a lot of practice making things that break other things. What followed was not so much a battle, as it was a demonstration of why apex predators from different species rarely fought each other unless absolutely necessary. Zethkar moved through the Corvith formation like a living weapon, his natural speed and strength amplified by 2 centuries of professional killing experience. Marcus supported him with covering fire from weapons that seemed to violate several galactic conventions regarding acceptable levels of destructive force. The Corvith operatives were skilled, experienced, and well-equipped. Under normal circumstances, 24 of them would have been more than sufficient to eliminate any single target, regardless of reputation or ability. But these were not normal circumstances. They were facing a human from a Deathworld and a Krillex assassin who had decided that their mutual survival was more important than their original objectives. Station security to all personnel in Section 7. A voice announced over the station's communication system. Please evacuate the area immediately. We have reports of weapons fire and possible terrorist activity. About time, Marcus muttered, reloading his weapon with movements so fluid they seemed almost automatic. Though I noticed they're not actually coming to investigate, just telling everyone to leave. Zethkar, who had just finished eliminating the last of the Corvith operatives on the corridor's left side, paused to consider this information. The station administration is complicit, he realized. They were instructed to provide cover for the assassination, or they were bribed to look the other way. Marcus agreed. Either way, we're on our own. The remaining Corvith operatives had regrouped near the station's main thoroughfare, using civilian evacuation as cover for their continued attack. It was a tactically sound decision that also demonstrated their complete disregard for innocent bystanders. That was a mistake, Marcus said, his voice taking on the kind of cold edge that Zethkar associated with his most dangerous clients. Humans do not like it when civilians are threatened. Humans really don't like it when civilians are threatened, Marcus confirmed. It brings out our more creative tendencies. The trader reached into his utility belt and withdrew what appeared to be a small sphere made of some kind of crystalline material. As Zethkar watched, the sphere began to emit a soft blue glow. What is that? Nanoswarm grenade, Marcus explained casually. Another human innovation. The nanobots are programmed to target specific genetic markers. In this case, Corvith DNA. Zethkar stared at the device with something approaching awe. Nanoswarm weapons were theoretical concepts in most of the galaxy. The technology required to create them was beyond the capabilities of all but the most advanced civilizations. Your species has weaponized nanotechnology. We've weaponized pretty much everything, Marcus admitted. It's kind of what we do. He threw the grenade toward the Corvith position with the casual ease of someone who had clearly done this before. The sphere detonated silently in mid-air, releasing a cloud of microscopic machines that were invisible to the naked eye, but devastating in their effect. The remaining Corvith operatives began collapsing within seconds. Their advanced armor and personal shields were completely useless against weapons that attacked at the cellular level. Within 30 seconds, the corridor was silent except for the sound of the station's evacuation alarms. Clean, efficient, and completely untraceable, Marcus observed with professional satisfaction. The nanobots will self-destruct in another few minutes, leaving no evidence of what actually happened here. Zethkar looked around at the aftermath of their brief but intense engagement. 24 of the galaxy's most skilled killers had been eliminated in less than 5 minutes, and he was beginning to understand that he had seriously underestimated what it meant to be human. Your species, he said slowly, is considerably more dangerous than the galactic databases suggest. Marcus laughed, but this time the sound held no trace of the earlier amusement. This was the laugh of someone who had survived things that should have killed him and found the experience educational rather than traumatic. The databases only include information about the humans who are willing to talk to galactic authorities, he explained. Most of us prefer to keep our capabilities to ourselves. It makes life simpler. The station's evacuation alarms continued to sound, but Zethkar noticed that no security forces had actually appeared to investigate the disturbance. Either the station's administration was more thoroughly corrupted than he had initially realized, or they were smart enough to stay away from situations involving humans and Krillix assassins. "What now?" he asked. Marcus checked his tactical displays and nodded with satisfaction. "Now we go have a conversation with whoever set this up. Because while I'm generally willing to live and let live, I draw the line at people trying to kill me on my own ship." The human began walking back toward the Lucky Strike, moving with the easy confidence of someone who owned whatever space he happened to be occupying at the moment. "What do we find them?" Zethkar asked, falling in a step beside the much smaller biped. "Well," Marcus said, "the good news is that whoever orchestrated this had to communicate with both of us to set it up. And human communications technology is very good at tracking those kinds of connections, especially when we're motivated to find someone." They reached the Lucky Strike's airlock, and Marcus began entering a complex access code that was clearly much more sophisticated than anything required for a civilian trading vessel. "The bad news," he continued, "is that they probably have backup plans. People smart enough to set up this kind of operation don't usually put all their resources into a single attempt." The airlock cycled open, and they stepped back into the ship that Zethkar now realized was far more than it appeared to be. As they moved through the corridors toward what he assumed was the bridge, he noticed defensive systems and weapon emplacements that would not have been out of place on a military vessel. "Marcus Chun," he said thoughtfully, "is not your real name." The human paused and looked back at him with an expression that might have been respect. "No," he admitted, "it's not. But it's the name I use for this particular line of work, and it's the name that whoever hired you would have in their records." "Who are you really?" Marcus smiled, and for a moment, Zethkar saw something in the human's eyes that reminded him of his own reflection when he was preparing for a particularly challenging hunt. "Someone," Marcus said, "who is about to remind the galaxy why humans are classified as a restricted species in most of the outer sectors." The bridge of the Lucky Strike was unlike anything Zethkar had ever seen in a civilian vessel. The command center was a masterpiece of human engineering that seamlessly blended multiple technologies from across the galaxy into something that was greater than the sum of its parts. Holographic displays showed real-time information about everything from local space traffic to the quantum fluctuations in nearby star systems. The pilot's chair was surrounded by neural interface connections that would have allowed a human operator to merge their consciousness with the ship's systems in ways that most species considered impossibly dangerous. "Welcome to the real Lucky Strike," Marcus said, settling into the pilot's chair and activating the neural interfaces with the casual ease of someone who had done this thousands of times. Or, as she's known in certain circles, the Pandora's Box. Zethkar's compound eyes focused on the name with growing understanding. Pandora's Box was legendary among the galaxy's criminal organizations, a ghost ship that appeared whenever someone needed a problem solved and disappeared before authorities could respond. The ship and its crew were credited with everything from destroying pirate fleets to overthrowing corrupt governments to stealing entire planets from under the noses of galactic superpowers. "You are the Pandora," he said, and it was not a question. "I am a human," Marcus replied, his consciousness now partially merged with the ship's systems. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that suggested the ship itself was part of the conversation. "The Pandora is what I become when people push me too far." The ship's main display activated, showing a complex web of communication traces that extended across multiple star systems. As Zethkar watched, the display began highlighting specific nodes in the network, tracing the electronic breadcrumbs that led back to whoever had orchestrated their assassination attempt. "Interesting," Marcus said, his enhanced awareness processing information at speeds that made Zethkar's own enhanced reflexes seem sluggish by comparison. "Our mysterious client used some very sophisticated routing protocols to hide their identity. Military-grade encryption, quantum scattered transmission nodes, even some hegemony stealth network access. The display zoomed in on a particular section of the galactic map, focusing on a region of space that Zethkar recognized with growing unease. The Vorthan Empire, he observed. More specifically, Marcus corrected, a black operations facility in the Kepler Nebula that doesn't officially exist. The kind of place where the Empire handles problems that need to disappear without leaving any inconvenient questions. Zethkar felt something cold settle in his thorax as the implications became clear. The Vorthan Empire was one of the galaxy's three major powers, controlling over 200 star systems and commanding military forces that could reduce planets to space dust. If they had decided that both a human traitor and a Krillex assassin needed to die, then the situation was far more serious than he had initially realized. Why would the Empire want us eliminated? He asked. Marcus was quiet for several moments as his consciousness sifted through the vast databases that the Lucky Strike had access to. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. Because, he said, 3 months ago, I cost them approximately 50 billion credits and the lives of 6,000 of their best soldiers. The main display shifted to show what appeared to be a detailed tactical analysis of a military engagement. Zethkar studied the information with growing amazement as he began to understand the scope of what the human had accomplished. The hegemony battle fleet, he realized, you did not just destroy their ships. You were protecting something that the Empire wanted very badly. A defecting Vorthan admiral who had information about their plans to invade the Terran Federation. Marcus confirmed. Admiral Kethvar had discovered that the Empire was planning to use biological weapons against human colonies. Weapons specifically designed to target Earth-based DNA. Zethkar's understanding of galactic politics was limited to those aspects that affected his profession, but even he understood the implications of that information. Biological warfare against humans would not just be an act of war. It would be genocide. The Admiral reached out through back channels, offering to defect in exchange for protection for his family. Marcus continued. The Federation couldn't officially help without starting a war, so they hired someone who could handle the situation unofficially. You. Me. Marcus agreed. What they didn't tell me was that the Empire had somehow learned about the Admiral's plans and had deployed half their battle fleet to intercept him. The tactical display showed the engagement in detail, and Zethkar found himself genuinely impressed by the audacity of the human strategy. Instead of trying to fight or flee from the overwhelming Imperial forces, Marcus had somehow managed to turn the Empire's own weapons against them. How did you destroy an entire battle fleet with one ship? He asked. Marcus's laugh carried that same note of predatory satisfaction that Zethkar was beginning to associate with humans who had survived impossible situations. I didn't destroy them, he said. I convinced them to destroy each other. The display zoomed in on a specific section of the battle, showing the moment when the Imperial fleet had suddenly begun firing on their own ships. As Zethkar watched the tactical analysis, he began to understand the elegant simplicity of the humans' approach. You hacked their communication systems. Better than that, Marcus said with obvious pride. I uploaded a virus that I've been working on for about 3 years. Something specifically designed to infiltrate Vorthan military networks and convince their ships that every other vessel in the fleet was actually a hostile target. Zethkar stared at the display in something approaching awe. Creating a virus capable of penetrating Imperial military security would have required years of research and access to classified technical information. Deploying it successfully during active combat would have required timing and technical skill that bordered on the supernatural. The Empire lost 6 capital ships, 3 dozen escort vessels, and their entire command structure for that sector. Marcus continued. More importantly, Admiral Kethvar made it safely to Federation space with enough information to prevent the biological weapons attack and exposed 12 other Imperial operations that were already in progress. And now they want revenge. Now, they want to eliminate anyone who might have information about their capabilities. Marcus corrected. The Admiral is safely hidden somewhere in Federation space, but I'm still operating in the gray areas where the Empire can reach me. Zethkar considered this information carefully. In his experience, revenge operations were usually straightforward affairs. Someone wanted someone else dead. They hired him to make it happen, and the matter was settled. But this situation was far more complex. "Why involve me?" he asked. "If they wanted you eliminated, they could have sent their own operatives." "Because," Marcus said, "if I die in an obvious assassination, the Federation will investigate. They'll know who killed their unofficial operative and why. But if I die in what appears to be an unrelated criminal attack, especially one carried out by the galaxy's most feared assassin, then it's just another case of a smuggler who got on the wrong side of the wrong people." The logic was sound, but it also revealed something about Imperial thinking that made Zethkar uncomfortable. They had been willing to sacrifice his reputation and possibly his life simply to provide cover for their real operation. "They were never planning to let me survive," he realized. "No," Marcus confirmed. "You were always meant to die here. Probably killed by station security while resisting arrest for my murder." The ship's sensors suddenly detected movement in the space around Kepler 7, and the main display shifted to show a tactical overview of the local system. What Zethkar saw made his exoskeleton feel suddenly cold. Imperial Navy, he observed, counting at least 24 military vessels moving into position around the station. "A full task force," Marcus agreed, his voice taking on the kind of cold focus that Zethkar associated with predators preparing to hunt. "They're not taking any chances this time." The human began activating systems throughout the Lucky Strike, and Zethkar realized that the ship was transforming from what appeared to be a simple freighter into something that resembled a warship more than a civilian vessel. Weapon systems emerged from concealed compartments, shield generators powered up to military specifications, and the ship's hull began reconfiguring itself for maximum defensive capability. "What can one ship do against a task force?" Zethkar asked. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since this entire situation had begun, the assassin felt something that might have been pity for the Imperial forces that were closing in on them. "Let me tell you something about humans," Marcus said, his consciousness now fully merged with the ship's combat systems. "We evolved on a planet where everything was trying to kill us. We survived by becoming better at killing than anything else around us. And when we finally ran out of things to fight on our own world, we took that talent to the stars." The Lucky Strike's engines began powering up, but instead of preparing to flee, the ship was clearly getting ready for combat. "The Empire thinks they understand what they're dealing with," Marcus continued. "They think I'm just another smuggler with some advanced technology and a lucky streak. They're about to learn what happens when you threaten someone who grew up on a Deathworld." The ship's communication system activated, broadcasting on the standard Imperial Navy frequency. "Imperial Task Force 7, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the void with the kind of casual confidence that suggested he was completely unconcerned about the odds he was facing. "This is Captain Marcus Chun of the independent vessel Lucky Strike. You have 60 seconds to withdraw from this system before I demonstrate why the Terran Federation classifies this ship as a weapon of mass destruction." The response came back immediately, carried on the kind of encrypted military channel that was supposed to be impossible for civilians to access. "Captain Chun, this is Admiral Vorthak of His Imperial Majesty's Navy. You are ordered to surrender immediately. Your ship will be impounded, and you'll be taken into custody for questioning regarding your involvement in terrorist activities against the Empire." Marcus looked at Zethkar with an expression that the assassin was beginning to recognize as extremely dangerous. "You know what the funny thing about Deathworlders is?" Marcus asked conversationally. "What?" "We really don't like being told what to do." What happened next defied everything Zethkar thought he knew about space combat, physics, and the natural limitations of technology. The Lucky Strike didn't flee from the Imperial Task Force. It accelerated directly toward the center of their formation with the kind of reckless aggression that suggested Marcus Chun had completely lost his mind. "Are you insane?" Zethkar demanded as the ship's inertial compensators struggled to handle the violent acceleration. "No," Marcus replied, his consciousness now so thoroughly merged with the ship's systems that his voice seemed to come from the walls themselves. I'm human. There's a difference, but I understand the confusion. The Imperial Task Force opened fire when a lucky strike reached optimal weapons range, filling the space around them with enough concentrated energy to vaporize a small moon. What should have happened was the immediate and complete destruction of one modified freighter and its crew. What actually happened was that the lucky strike seemed to phase in and out of existence, dancing between the weapon's fire with impossible grace, while simultaneously launching attacks that punched through Imperial shields as if they were made of tissue paper. Quantum displacement field, Marcus explained as another volley of plasma cannon fire passed harmlessly through the space they had occupied a nanosecond earlier. Human invention, of course. We discovered that if you can manipulate quantum probability on a macro scale, you could be in several places at once until reality decides which one is actually real. Zethkar watched in fascination as the ship's weapons systems targeted the Imperial vessels with surgical precision. Instead of trying to destroy the massive warships, Marcus was systematically eliminating their ability to fight. Weapons arrays vanished in precisely targeted explosions. Shield generators overloaded in cascading failures. Engine systems suffered critical malfunctions that left the ships dead in space, but intact. You are disabling them, the assassin observed. I'm making a point, Marcus corrected. The Empire thinks they can threaten me with overwhelming force. I'm demonstrating that force is only overwhelming if you fight on their terms. One of the Imperial cruisers managed to score a direct hit on the lucky strike, and Zethkar felt the ship shudder under the impact. For a moment, he thought they were finally going to discover the limitations of human technology. Instead, the ship's hull simply absorbed the energy and redirected it back at the attacking vessel in a focus beam that sliced through their forward armor like a cutting torch. Adaptive defense matrix, Marcus explained. Any energy directed at us gets analyzed, processed, and returned with interest. The harder they hit us, the harder we can hit back. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted approximately 8 minutes. When it was over, the entire Imperial task force was floating dead in space, their crews alive, but their ships completely helpless. Not a single vessel had been destroyed, but none of them would be capable of independent movement for several months. Now, Marcus said, opening a communication channel to the Imperial flagship, let's have that conversation. The response came from Admiral Vorthak himself, and Zethkar could hear the barely controlled fury in the Imperial officer's voice. What are you, human? Marcus laughed, and the sound carried across the void with a kind of casual menace that made even Zethkar's exoskeleton feel suddenly cold. I'm a reminder, he said. A reminder that your empire is not the apex predator you think it is. There are beings in this galaxy who are older, smarter, and considerably more dangerous than you are. You cannot fight the entire Imperial Navy, Admiral Vorthak replied, but there was something in his tone that suggested he was no longer entirely certain of that fact. You're right, Marcus agreed. I can't fight your entire navy, but I don't have to. See, the thing about humans is that we're very good at making friends. And some of our friends have fleets that make yours look like a collection of pleasure craft. The main display activated, showing what appeared to be a live tactical feed from somewhere in deep space. As Zethkar watched, he began to see ships emerging from quantum slip drives. Not dozens of ships or even hundreds, but thousands. The vessels represented dozens of different species and technological traditions, but they were all moving in perfect coordination. The Free Traders Alliance, Marcus explained. Independent merchants, smugglers, and freelancers from across the galaxy. We don't have governments or armies, but we have something better. We have a mutual defense pact. Admiral Vorthak's voice, when it came, carried a note of something that might have been respect mixed with considerable concern. Those ships, they represent half the independent vessels in the galaxy. More than half, Marcus corrected, and every single one of them has received the same message. The Vorthan Empire has declared war on human traders. The Alliance takes that kind of threat very seriously. Zethkar studied the tactical display with growing amazement. The fleet that had assembled was not just large. It represented a level of coordination and mutual cooperation that should have been impossible among independent operators. How, he asked. Quantum communication networks, Marcus replied. Another human innovation. We've been building connections across the galaxy for the past 50 years, creating a web of mutual support that most governments don't even know exists. The ship's sensors detected additional movement, and the display expanded to show the arrival of more vessels. These ships were clearly military in design, but they bore the insignia of the Terran Federation rather than any of the major galactic powers. And just to make things crystal clear, Marcus continued, his voice taking on the kind of cold formality that suggested he was speaking for official publication. The Federation Navy would like to remind the Empire that attacking human civilians is considered an act of war. Admiral Vorthak was silent for several long moments. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the defeated tone of someone who had suddenly realized they were in over their head. What are your terms? Marcus smiled, and Zethkar realized that this was what the human had been working toward from the beginning. The demonstration of force, the revelation of hidden alliances, the careful escalation, all of it had been designed to reach exactly this moment. The Empire will cease all operations against human traders, Marcus said. You will withdraw from this system and will not return. And you will send a message to your intelligence services explaining that hiring assassins to eliminate humans is no longer a viable strategy. And in return? In return, Marcus said, I will allow you to leave this system with your ships and your crews intact. I will also provide you with detailed technical specifications for the quantum displacement technology, one just used to disable your task force. Zethkar's compound eyes focused on the human with surprise. You're giving them your technology? I'm giving them enough information to understand that trying to fight us is futile, Marcus corrected. Once they realize that we're about 50 years ahead of them technologically, they'll be much more interested in trade agreements than military conflicts. Admiral Vorthak's response came with the kind of prompt decision-making that suggested he was eager to accept terms that would allow him to escape this situation with his career intact. Terms accepted, he said. The Empire will withdraw from this system immediately. As the Imperial Task Force began the slow process of limping away from Kepler 7 under emergency power, Marcus finally disengaged from the ship's neural interfaces and returned to normal consciousness. Well, he said, stretching like someone who had just completed a moderately challenging workout rather than someone who had just defeated an entire military fleet. That was entertaining. Zethkar looked around the bridge, still trying to process everything he had witnessed. In the space of a few hours, he had gone from being the galaxy's most feared assassin to being a witness to the kind of power that most beings could barely imagine. What happens now, he asked. Marcus considered the question for several moments, then activated a communication system that connected to what appeared to be a secure Federation network. Now, he said, we have a conversation with some people who have been very interested in meeting you. The main display activated to show the bridge of what was clearly a Federation warship. The human officer who appeared on screen wore the kind of uniform that suggested very high rank and even higher security clearance. Captain Chun, the officer said, good work with the Imperial Task Force. The Federation appreciates your handling of the situation. Always happy to help, Marcus replied. Admiral Harrison, I'd like you to meet Zethkar, the Soul Reaper. He's been very helpful in resolving this little misunderstanding. Admiral Harrison studied Zethkar with the kind of analytical attention that the assassin usually received from potential clients. The Krillex assassin, she observed, we've been hoping for an opportunity to speak with you. Zethkar felt something cold settle in his thorax. Speak with me about what? About a job, Admiral Harrison said. The kind of job that requires someone with your particular skills and Marcus's technological resources. Marcus leaned back in his chair with an expression of interest. What kind of problem do you need solved? The kind that involves hunting down and eliminating the people who have been selling advanced weapons to terrorist organizations, Admiral Harrison replied. We need someone who can operate outside official channels and who has the reputation to make contacts that legitimate authorities cannot reach. Zethkar looked from the Admiral to Marcus and back again, beginning to understand that his life was about to become considerably more complicated than it had been when he was simply the galaxy's most feared assassin. And if I refuse, he asked. Admiral Harrison smiled with the kind of expression that reminded Zethkar that humans were, at their core, predators from a death world. Then, you're free to return to your old profession, she said. Though I should mention that word has already gotten out about your cooperation with Captain Chun. Your reputation for being untouchable has been somewhat modified. Marcus laughed, and Zethkar realized that the human had been planning this outcome from the beginning. Welcome to the team, Marcus said. I think you're going to find that working with humans is considerably more interesting than working against us. Zethkar considered his options and realized that he really didn't have any. His old life as an independent assassin was effectively over, but perhaps his new life as part of a human operation would prove to be equally challenging. Very well, he said, but I have one condition. What's that? Marcus asked. Next time someone tries to hire me to kill a human, Zethkar said, I want to know exactly what species I'm really dealing with before I accept the contract. Marcus Chun, captain of the Lucky Strike, scourge of the Imperial Navy, and apparently unofficial operative of the Terran Federation, began to laugh with the kind of genuine amusement that suggested he had found a kindred spirit among the stars. Deal, he said, but I should probably warn you. Working with humans means you're going to see a lot of things that most beings consider impossible. Zethkar looked around at the bridge of a ship that could phase in and out of reality, having just watched its crew defeat an entire Imperial task force without destroying a single vessel, while communicating with a fleet of thousands that had assembled in less than an hour. I think, he said, I am beginning to understand what that means. And in the depths of space, where predators from two different worlds had found common ground, the Lucky Strike set course for adventures that would make their previous exploits seem like peaceful trading runs by comparison.